maintaining multiple partnerships, India has choice and can diversify its dependence even and maximize benefits and minimize risks to its own freedom of action. India sees the Quad as a grouping of like-minded partners that share its vision of the Indo-Pacific, a free, open, inclusive, secure and prosperous region where countries are free to make choices and where a rules-based order prevails. They also agree, these like-minded partners, and India agrees on this as well, that there are challenges to this vision that have arisen recently. China's behavior is one of them, but not the only one. Nonetheless, these countries do share that concern about challenges to the vision of the region, and they agree, as India does, that existing mechanisms, whether that is bilateral relationships or its regional organizations, are insufficient. They're necessary to tackle these challenges, but insufficient to do so. So India sees these kind of willing and capable partners as indispensable, as crucial to working with it in tackling these challenges, because it too cannot handle the challenges to this vision of the region and to its own security and prosperity on its own. For Indian policymakers, they have thought of multi-alignment or what I call diversification of partnerships as the route to strategic autonomy. And for India, strategic autonomy essentially, it doesn't mean autarky, it doesn't mean India will stand alone. What it means is that India has freedom of action or independence of action, where Indian policymakers get to decide what action they're going to take based on Indian interests and not because they happen to be in a bloc or an alliance. And so for Indian policymakers, that doesn't mean that they will not align on certain interests or issues with a partner or set of partners. So as I have argued, I actually think India is aligning with the Quad partners, for instance, to balance China, but it won't align, for example, with those very countries to necessarily isolate Russia. So I think I think these concepts of strategic autonomy and multi-alignment are kind of complementary to each other. One, in fact, India sees as the route to actually be able to achieve that independence of action, that by maintaining multiple partnerships, India has choice and can diversify its dependence even and maximize benefits and minimize risks to its own freedom of action. India has thought about Russia-China relations, or even before that, Soviet-China relations, for over 5 decades. This is something that is of deep interest to India because the closer Russia and China get, that has often been to India's detriment. So in some ways, it's actually been an Indian objective to keep Russia-China ties from deepening, because for India, it doesn't want to see a partner like Russia essentially get even closer to its adversary or rival, China. And so it's been quite concerned about growing Sino-Russian ties over the last few years. It has been particularly concerned about what the implications are of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and whether Russia will become more dependent on China, more beholden to China, because the concern for India is, does a Russia more dependent on China take actions that China might ask of it that might be against Indian interests, whether that is in the India-China crisis or at the UN Security Council in terms of how Russia votes and who it supports. But what this has meant, this Indian concern about Russia-China ties, is two different things. On the one hand, that has actually led to the argument that it's best not to isolate Russia. It has meant that India says that, look, we want to give Russia some non-China options because eventually Russia-China ties will fray. And so you want to give it the ability for Russia to diversify its partnerships as well. And India is already dependent on Russia, over-dependent, I would say, on some defense supplies. And so it wants to be able to ensure that those ties don't get disrupted by Russia only having a China option. Having said that, India's concerns about Russia-China ties and the stance Russia has taken vis-a-vis supporting China more closely or being neutral during India-China crises has actually meant that it has opened up the space for other partnerships that are in fact more useful to India in terms of where there's strategic convergence. So one of the reasons, for example, that India has deepened ties with the US, Australia, Japan, Quad partners, is that it needs partners to help it balance China, both in terms of externally, in terms of shaping a favorable balance of power in the region, as well as helping India build up its capabilities. And it cannot trust that Russia will be that reliable in that regard. And so I think it's opened up space. It has also meant that India is willing to make choices vis-a-vis these countries that sometimes upset Russia. And so, for example, to me, the Quad is a living embodiment of the idea and a reflection of the point that India, when it's in India's interests, is willing to make choices and align, even if it upsets a friend or a partner like Russia, which has been quite upset about the Quad and, in fact, has not been supportive of it, has criticized it even more so than China, in fact. I think Australia-India relations, it's not an exaggeration to say, are better than they've ever been before. What is healthy about this relationship is it's not a single domain relationship. It's not only an economic or only a diaspora relationship. You've really seen in the last few years progress across a range of domains, and I'll come to that. But I think underpinning this is a strategic convergence of kind of India and Australia sharing a view of what they'd like to see the Indo-Pacific look like. They don't want to see a unipolar Indo-Pacific or unipolar Asia dominated by China, where Beijing gets to set the terms and everybody else just has to follow. And the idea that you need partners to then ensure that that vision that you do have prevails. And so I think that's strategic convergence, and the reason it is important is it helps the kind of the cooperation in other domains go at a faster pace. It builds momentum into the relationship. It means that the leaders themselves have taken an interest in the relationship, and that's important. And so I think as a result of this strategic convergence, which also makes you manage differences better when they do arise, you have seen greater defense and security cooperation between Australia and India, which I think will also continue. When you asked about potential, I think that will continue to grow, perhaps more cooperation in the Indian Ocean region in particular. And you've seen, for example, very recently, India deploy a maritime reconnaissance aircraft, the P-8I, to Darwin, with a reciprocal deployment from Australia due in India sometime in June. This is quite unusual. India doesn't do this with too many other countries. It just tells you how much India has changed its view of Australia, but also a level of trust and a comfort level that has developed. And I think you're also seeing now developments on the economic side with this new economic agreement. I think there's a lot more potential there, but I think what will be important is for the current economic agreement to really bear fruit, because I think there's nothing like a demonstration effect to prove to both sides that actually on the economic side that there are reasons and there are interests in a mutually beneficial way to actually take economic ties, deeper business-to-business ties, even more closer. And then I think there's a whole range of things that one could put under kind of people-to-people ties, which is everything from improving knowledge of each other, the new India-Australia Centre that has been funded, or kind of the increasing number of students from India, high-skilled workers here, but Australian tourists going to India, and all these things are not just about or the diaspora or people-to-people linkages. These are economic and technical. This will help innovation. This will help economies on both sides. And so I think you've really seen that kind of momentum that has driven all these developments. I will say in the future what will be really important, and the flip side of this is the pitfalls, which is I think really needing this to keep this momentum going on the kind of political and strategic level, and then showing that these agreements are actually bearing fruit. There's nothing like actual results to show that something is worthwhile, to do something for governments and business to actually make the effort to continue to invest in the relationship. The pitfall is that for different reasons, if, for example, there are high expectations of the relationship and either side thinks it's not paying off, it's not delivering, or that the other side is not living up to their kind of view. So Australia thinks India is not quite the country, Australia thought, or is not delivering, doesn't justify the kind of investment, or the reverse, that India thinks Australia is not useful or important in the way that they had envisioned. So I think that's, to me, the pitfall across a range of issues. But I would say that it is remarkable how much has been achieved over the last few years at the pace that it has been achieved, which other countries, other parts of India might actually look on enviously at.